So I've taken a break from listening to Tool's new single, Fear Inoculum, on repeat, to bring you a new film review. Chuck and Buck is an excruciatingly uncomfortable homoerotic black comedy drama written by Mike White and directed by Miguel Arteta. It was released in 2000 to widespread critical acclaim and understandably mixed audience reception. The film follows the story of Buck, a naive man-child stuck in a state of arrested development after his caretaking mother suddenly dies. Buck invites his childhood friend, Chuck, who now goes by Charlie, to his mother's funeral. Although the two experimented sexually as children, Charlie turned out very different from Buck and is a successful music industry executive with a fiancé and an actual life to live. This is a stark contrast to Buck, who lives in unsettlingly childlike delusion. After the funeral, Buck becomes obsessed with Charlie and stalks him and his wife constantly, going so far as to follow the pair to their home in Los Angeles. Buck decides to write a play, which loosely follows his story pertaining to Charlie and his fiancée in misguided hopes to win him back, with possibly disastrous results. I don't want to spoil anything further. Chuck and Buck is, quite possibly, the most awkward and uncomfortable comedy I've ever seen, and in that, it totally achieves its goals. Mike White's performance as Buck is unnerving but magnetic, and refreshingly fearless, exploring the mind of a truly disturbed individual who can't tear himself away from the past and the hope that once held. He has a deep understanding of his material and is a commanding force on screen, making the audience squirm with childlike mannerisms and disposition blown out of proportion in decidedly adult situations. Chris Weitz is great as Chuck, or Charlie, in his role as a defensive but ultimately repressed record executive whose life is totally upended by Buck's tireless advances in psychological prodding, eventually bringing to the surface old wounds and unearthed feelings. Miguel Arteta's direction is assured and unique. It reminded me of a Dogma 95 film that felt very grounded and human. It was shot on mini DV cassettes, which was a staple of the Dogma movement. I'm not sure if it was an artistic decision or because of the film's low budget, but either way, it worked. The handheld cinematography is intense and makes scenes that were already uncomfortable to sit through even more arresting. I watched the film when I was 15 years old and thought I'd already seen it all by that time. I couldn't have been more wrong. I'll never forget how tense I was during the infamous Chuck and Buck suck and fuck scene. I never expected to be so challenged by a film simply through dialogue between two characters. This is a film which hasn't received much recognition since its release, and is one of the many independent films released during the late 90s and early 2000s which got swept under the rug and is remembered by very few. The few people who have watched the film nowadays have generally responded to it poorly, after either complaining about the film's lack of comedy and focus on homoerotic tension, or accusing the film of homophobia. The claims that the film is homophobic are unfounded and dismissible, considering that the film is directed by a bisexual man. That, and it's got the stamp of approval by yours truly, who is a pansexual man, if that means anything to you. All in all, Chuck and Buck succeeds in a genre explored by few filmmakers, the psychological comedy. It plunges into the depths of sexual repression, arrested development, and the unwillingness to simply move on like few other films which came before or after. It's certainly no milestone, but it's a great film and one which I highly recommend to those comfortable enough with their sexuality to not feel like the film is violently attacking them. Chuck and Buck merits a score of 8 out of 10.